Stand fast, it says, or for freedom Christ has set us free. Therefore stand fast and don't be entangled again with the yoke of bondage. Stay within your liberty. Enjoy your freedom. Galatians 2:4 is a good illustration of it. Paul was always hounded by the Judaizers who wanted him to keep the law and get circumcised and circumcise all the Gentiles and make the Gentiles keep the ceremonies of Moses. So in Galatians 2:4, and that because of false brethren unawares brought in, who came in secretly to spy out our liberty, which we have in Christ Jesus, that they might bring us into bondage. Here came the Judaizers. They were looking over the Gentile Christians, and they were spying out their liberty. What that really means is they were looking for weak points in the enemy's position, like scouts, you know. They were trying to find where they were abusing liberty or where the liberty wasn't working so they could force them back into bondage. But verse 5, to whom we gave place by subjection? No, not for an hour. We didn't let them take away our liberty. Man, we were free from Jewish ceremonialism, and we weren't about to subscribe to it. Not for an hour did we do that. Why, Paul? That the truth of the gospel might continue with you. Listen, if you give up your liberty all the time, needlessly giving up your liberty to ritual and form and ceremony and tradition, people will confuse that with the truth of the gospel. If you identify your Christianity by all the things you don't do, then people will think that's what Christianity is. Hold on to your liberty. You say, but wait a minute. When the Apostle Paul went to Jerusalem and they told him to go take a Jewish vow, he did it. How come he's willing in one place to keep the ceremony of Moses and he's not willing in another place? That's a fair question. Let me give you the answer. He only gave up his liberty when it was necessary to reach the people he was dealing with. Listen, when the Judaizers tried to hassle Paul to circumcise the Gentiles, he says, forget it. The Gentiles don't even believe in circumcision anyway. That's no problem with them. But when it came to working with the Jews, if circumcision was going to make Timothy better able to work with the Jews, he would circumcise Timothy. Do you see what the point is? You never give up your liberty needlessly, or people confuse the gospel with what you do or don't do. But you will relinquish your liberty when in a society that you're in, it would offend somebody. That's the difference. It's one thing to be a Jew unto the Jews. It's something else to turn all the Gentiles into Jews. Paul says, not for a minute. So, your liberty comes from God. It is received through the gospel. It is defined as freedom from the law, the curse, and all those things I mentioned. It belongs to all Christians. You're to hold on to it. And one other point. And that's the point that gets us into 1 Corinthians 10. You're not to abuse it. Just because you're holding on to it and just because you have it, you can't abuse it. Now here's the tension. On the one hand, see, I'm holding my liberty. This is my right. On the other hand, you don't want to offend anybody. You don't want to abuse your liberty. Now, there are two ways to abuse your freedom. I'm going to give you these two. We've covered one. We're covering another one. Here they are. There are two ways to abuse your freedom. Number one, by doing things that offend other people. By doing things that offend other people. And that will vary from culture to culture, year to year, age to age. Paul says, look, if I'm among Jews, yes, I will keep some Mosaic ceremonies. I want to reach them. But if I'm among the Gentiles, man, I'm not going to make them all do the Jewish laws, which they don't even understand anyway. That would just be to relinquish my liberty needlessly and confuse them. So he says, in chapter 9, he went into great detail. One way to abuse your liberty is to do things that offend others. Say, I'm free in Christ, man, I can do whatever I want. I'll go out and do what I want. I don't care what anybody thinks. I was talking to missionaries recently who were in Europe. They were in a little village, small area. And the women there did not shave their legs. That was just, and that's true in a lot of places in the world, but this particular place, they didn't do it. Only one kind of woman shaved her legs, and that was a prostitute. That was the custom. And well, when the missionary ladies arrived with their legs shaved, it caused a lot of problems. Because the people did not understand that. And they had to relinquish their liberty at that point because they didn't want to be offensive. Because of the identification. Now that's principle number one. You're abusing your liberty when you're needlessly harming someone else, when you could relinquish it. Principle 2. The second way you abuse your liberty is by doing things that could disqualify you from service. In other words, when you run your liberty out to its limits and you're playing on the thin edge. I think of the little boy who climbed in the bunk bed one night. In the middle of the night, there was a tremendous crash, and he fell out and hit the floor with a thud, and his father came running in, and he was crying on the floor, and he says, well, what happened? How did you ever do that? He says, I think I fell asleep too close to where I got in. You know, I think there's a lot of Christians who fall asleep too close to where they got in. And they're always flirting on the borderline. They got their liberty, they're running their liberty right out to the sheer edge. Paul says there are two dangers in the abuse of liberty. One, that you would offend somebody else. Two, that you would get yourself in a position to be tempted to fall into sin and get disqualified from service. These two things make up chapter 9 and chapter 10 of 1 Corinthians. The first point of offending another is in chapter 9. The second point of getting yourself in trouble is in chapter 10. And he uses in chapter 10, verses 1 to 13, an illustration of Israel to make his point. Israel fell asleep too close to where they got in and got in a lot of trouble. This is a powerful illustration. It kind of comes out of verses 24 to 27 of chapter 9. Notice it. Paul says in 24, we're all in a race. We can potentially receive the prize, so run to win. Now, what is the prize? To win people to Christ, to be a soul winner, to be somebody who is used of God to win people to Christ. And he says if you're going to do that, you're going to have to be, verse 25, temperate or self-controlled. So he says, that's the way I run in verse 26, and I keep my body and bring it into subjection, unless I myself should become disqualified. Now, Paul says, look, the Christian life is like a race. We're all Christians, we're in the race, but some of us could get disqualified. Doesn't mean you lose your salvation. No. It means you could be disqualified out of usefulness. He's talking about service, winning people to Christ, reaching people. And he says, in order for me to really reach people, I have to bring my body into subjection. I have to be under self-control. I can't just let my body do whatever it wants. I've got to be careful about my liberties. I've got to be careful about what I allow for myself, or I'll run myself right out into the sheer edge. I'll get tempted, and off I'll go and be disqualified and set out of service. And with that concept, he moves into verses 1 to 13 of chapter 10, and he says this is exactly what happened to the Israelites. Because of a failure to limit their liberty, because of a failure to really deal with their bodies, to really exercise self-control, they lost out.